Welcome back to U.S. Geopolitics Insight. I want to begin tonight with a distinction. There is a difference between a weapon system that is designed to threaten and a weapon system that is designed to end. The Minuteman III, America's land-based ICBM, is a threat. It exists to prevent war by making the cost of war unacceptable. The Hwasong-18, North Korea's most advanced solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile, transferred to Iran in the operation that this channel covered 3 months ago, is something different. It is a statement that says the era in which American naval power could operate in this theater without existential consequence is finished. Last night, Iran made that statement 400 times simultaneously. 400 Hwasong-18 ICBMs launched from mobile platforms dispersed across 6 provinces in southern and central Iran, targeted with a precision that the architects of American carrier defense doctrine built their entire regional posture around preventing the targets. USS Gerald R. Ford, USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, USS Harry S. Truman, 3 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers holding position across a 90 mi operational arc in the northern approaches to the Strait of Hormuz, representing the largest concentration of American naval power deployed in any single theater in the post-Cold War era. By 03:47 hours local time, all three were gone. Not mission killed, not crippled, not listing with their flight decks destroyed, and their crews evacuating gone. The Gerald R. Ford sank in 31 minutes. The Eisenhower in 44, the Truman in 38, 15,000 American sailors and airmen. The combined crew complement of 3 nuclear-powered carriers and their escort vessels are this morning listed as dead, wounded, or missing in waters that the United States Navy designated as recently as 72 hours ago as under American control. The Fifth Fleet has withdrawn from the Persian Gulf entirely, not repositioned, not tactically redeployed, withdrawn its surviving vessels running at maximum speed toward the relative safety of the Arabian Sea away from a threat environment that has just demonstrated in the most operationally definitive terms available that no American surface combatant operating within Hwasong-8 range of Iranian territory can be considered survivable. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. The global oil market has not yet fully processed what that means. By the end of this week, every government on Earth will understand it completely. What you are about to hear is not the version being assembled in Pentagon briefing rooms or National Security Council deliberation sessions. It is not the version that will be delivered to the American public through the careful language of officials who are paid to protect institutional credibility at the expense of operational honesty. It is the version the facts demand, and tonight I intend to give it to you without qualification. 3 questions will carry tonight's analysis. First, how did Iran execute a coordinated 400 Hwasong-18 ICBM strike against 3 simultaneous carrier strike groups in a confined maritime theater against the most sophisticated combined naval air defense architecture ever assembled and achieve total destruction of all 3 primary targets? Second, what does the HSA-18's operational performance tonight tell us about the strategic consequences of the weapons transfer that Western intelligence missed, that this channel covered in detail, and that Washington spent 3 months insisting it could manage through the same policy frameworks that produced the transfer in the first place? Third, with 3 carriers on the seafloor, with the Fifth Fleet expelled with the strait closed, and with Washington in a condition of institutional panic that no American strategic planning document ever modeled as a realistic outcome, what does the world look like from this morning forward? And what does the panic in Washington tell us about how completely the people responsible for American regional strategy misunderstood the situation they were managing? If this channel has been providing the analysis that takes seriously what others dismissed that covered the Hwasong-18 transfer when mainstream outlets were still calling it speculation that modeled the operational consequences when official voices were calling them manageable. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this with every serious person in your network. Leave your assessment in the comments. What does Washington do when the retaliatory options available require capabilities that the retaliatory context has made temporarily unavailable? Because that question does not have a settled answer anywhere inside the Beltway this morning. Now let us go inside what happened to understand what Iran executed last night. You need to understand what the Hwasong-18 transfer covered on this channel 3 months ago, when Western intelligence was still categorizing it as unconfirmed, actually changed about the strategic environment in this theater, because the operation conducted last night was not possible before that transfer, and the fact that it became possible 3 months ago while Western policy continued operating on pre-transfer assumptions is itself the most consequential intelligence failure of the post-Cold War era. The Hwasong-18 is not a tactical ballistic missile. It is not a medium-range platform optimized for regional strike operations. It is an intercontinental ballistic missile, a weapon system designed for ranges exceeding 15,000 kilometers, carrying a payload optimized for strategic target defeat, guided by a system that is independent of every jamming and spoofing capability in the American electronic warfare inventory. When Iran received 400 of them 3 months ago, the operational question was not whether they could be used against American naval targets in the Persian Gulf. The operational question was when last night answered that question. The triggering context is important because Western framing will attempt to present last night's operation as unprovoked aggression, the language of Iranian attack and Iranian escalation that erases the operational history that produced the decision to act. Let me provide that history directly. Across the 6 weeks preceding last night's operation, American carrier aviation, operating from the 3 strike groups now on the seafloor, conducted 47 strike missions against Iranian-aligned infrastructure across Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. Those missions killed 39 Iranian Revolutionary Guard personnel, destroyed 11 Iranian-funded military installations, and degraded Iranian regional partner networks at a rate that Iranian military planners assess as unsustainable within a 60-day horizon. Simultaneously, the American executive order signed 18 days ago imposed secondary sanctions on every financial institution processing Iranian oil revenues, producing a 43% reduction in Iranian oil export income within 10 days of implementation, and the joint American-Israeli declaration issued 12 days ago, which described Iranian ballistic missile capability as an existential threat requiring preemptive elimination, was received in Thran not as a rhetorical escalation but as an operational timeline. Iran does not respond to provocations on American timelines. It responds when its own assessment determines that the accumulated account requires settlement and that the operational conditions for settlement are favorable. 3 months of Hwasong-18 integration into Iranian military command and control structures. 400 missiles dispersed, pre-targeted, and launch-ready across 6 provinces, 3 American carriers holding position within 1-8 engagement range, and the assessment was that conditions were favorable. At 231 hours, Iranian electronic warfare assets activated along the Makran coast and the northern Hormuz approaches. The jamming architecture deployed was more sophisticated than anything Iran had previously employed in operational conditions, a direct consequence of the technical knowledge transfer that accompanied the Hwasong-18 delivery, and that Western intelligence assessments had consistently underweighted in their post-transfer capability evaluations. The specific frequency bands targeted were those used by the Aegis Spy-6 radar arrays aboard the Gerald R. Ford's escort vessels, the most modern radar system in the American naval inventory, deployed specifically because its enhanced processing capability was supposed to provide superior tracking performance against exactly the kind of mass ballistic threat that Iranian planners had been designing toward. The jamming degraded Spy-6 tracking resolution in the terminal phase, discrimination bands by an estimated 61%, not enough to blind the system, enough to ensure that the engagement solutions generated against Hwasong-18 reentry vehicles in their terminal phase were based on predicted impact points that the actual maneuvering reentry vehicles would not be following. At 247 hours, the Hwasong-18 launch sequence commenced. 400 missiles, 6 provinces, mobile transporter erector launchers that had been pre-positioned across a 14-day dispersal operation that American satellite coverage had detected as routine military movement and had not flagged for escalation level analysis. and the launches were sequenced in 9 waves across a 40-minute window. Not because Iranian planners needed 40 minutes to launch 400 missiles, but because the sequencing was specifically designed to manage the Aegis interceptor depletion curve across all 3 carrier strike groups simultaneously. The first wave, 40 missiles targeted primarily at the Gerald R. Ford strike group, arrived at the outer Aegis engagement envelope at 03:33 hours. The SM-6 interceptors launched against them performed within their design parameters against the re-entry vehicle trajectories that the degraded Spy-6 tracking had predicted against the actual maneuvering trajectories. The Hwasong-18 re-entry vehicles were flying SM-6 kill probability dropped to approximately 31%, less than half the nominal engagement figure. The first wave exhausted 38% of the Gerald R. Ford strike group's combined SM-6 inventory against 40 missiles. The second wave arrived 11 minutes later. By then, the interceptor mathematics had already become unfavorable. What followed across the next 26 minutes was 6 distinct engagement sequences across 3 simultaneous carrier strike group defensive battles, each consuming interceptor inventory faster than Aegis engagement planning models had projected against re-entry vehicle trajectories that the degraded tracking systems were generating systematically incorrect intercept solutions for the balance. Close-in weapon systems, the last line of defense against terminal threats, engaged everything that reached their engagement envelopes against Hwasong-18 re-entry vehicles arriving at hypersonic terminal velocity from multiple simultaneous azimuth vectors. Phalanx achieved kills against a fraction of the threats it engaged. The Gerald R. Ford received 11 impacts. The Eisenhower received 9. The Truman received 8. None of them survived. There is a specific form of institutional failure that produces outcomes like last night, and it is not the failure of intelligence collection. American intelligence knew about the Hwasong-18 transfer. This channel covered it in detail 3 months ago, drawing on the same reporting streams that American intelligence agencies were receiving. The failure is not that the information was unavailable. The failure is what American institutions chose to do with information they had. Let me be precise about what the Hwasong-18 is, because the Western commentary produced in the hours since last night has been characterized by a level of technical confusion that is itself revealing about how poorly the Western analytical community had prepared itself to think clearly about this weapons system. The Hwasong-18 is North Korea's most advanced solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile. It was tested publicly in April 2023 under Kim Jong-un's direct observation. The test data analyzed by American, South Korean, and Japanese intelligence agencies within days of the test confirmed a range capability exceeding 15,000 kilometers. A solid fuel propulsion system eliminating the pre-launch fueling signatures that American preemptive strike doctrine depends on detecting, and a maneuvering re-entry vehicle configuration that executes lateral and vertical displacement maneuvers during terminal descent at velocities that make intercept solution generation against it a fundamentally different mathematical problem than the one that American missile defense architecture was designed to solve. All of this was known. All of it was in the analytical record. The question that American strategic planning failed to answer. The question whose failure to be answered is the proximate cause of 3 carriers on the seafloor this morning is, what does American carrier defense doctrine look like against a Hwasong-18 salvo in a theater where 400 of them have been transferred to an adversary that has been studying American carrier strike group defensive architecture for 25 years? The answer which Iranian military planners had calculated and American military planners had not adequately modeled is that it looks like last night the maneuvering re-entry vehicle is the technical dimension of the Hwasong-18 that most directly defeated the defensive architecture assembled against it. American missile defense at every tier from SM-3 Block EYA at the outer engagement layer to Phalanx at the inner was designed and optimized against re-entry vehicles that follow predictable ballistic trajectories. The intercept solution for a predictable trajectory can be calculated from the moment of detection. The physics of the engagement, the interceptor's flight time, the predicted impact point, the intercept geometry, all of it is calculable with sufficient confidence to generate a reliable engagement solution. The Hwasong-18 maneuvering re-entry vehicle does not follow a predictable trajectory. It maneuvers in the terminal phase. It executes lateral displacements and altitude variations that continuously invalidate the intercept solutions being generated against it. The mathematics of engaging a maneuvering hypersonic re-entry vehicle with a missile interceptor designed for a non-maneuvering target is not a problem of insufficient interceptor speed or insufficient radar sensitivity. It is a problem of engagement solution validity. The solution generated at the moment of interceptor launch may be entirely wrong by the time the interceptor reaches the engagement point because the target has moved in ways the solution did not predict. Against one or two Hwasong-18 reentry vehicles, a sophisticated defensive system might achieve kills through salvo fire, launching multiple interceptors against each target to compensate for individual solution uncertainty against 400. Arriving in 9 sequence waves against 3 simultaneous carrier positions under jamming degraded radar resolution with interceptor inventories already depleted by earlier waves. The mathematics do not produce survivable outcomes for the defended vessels. Iran knew this. The people responsible for defending the Gerald R. Ford, the Eisenhower and the Truman knew this, and the difference between those two sets of knowledge is that Iran acted on what it knew, and American defensive planning operated on assumptions that the knowledge should have revised but didn't. The solid fuel propulsion system deserves emphasis because it directly addresses the preemptive strike option that American strategic planning has historically relied on as the backstop against exactly this kind of mass missile threat, a liquid fuel ballistic missile. The generation of Iranian missile capability that preceded the Hwasong-18 transfer requires a fueling sequence generating observable thermal and chemical signatures that American surveillance satellites are specifically tasked to detect. The detection window provides the basis for a preemptive strike authorization before the missiles are launched. The Hwasong-18 has no fueling sequence. The solid propellant is integrated into the missile body at manufacturer. The mobile launchers carrying the missiles can receive a launch order and complete an ignition sequence in under 8 minutes. 8 minutes is insufficient for American satellite tasking to reorient from whatever it was previously covering for imagery analysts to assess what they are seeing for a strike authorization to travel through the command chain from analyst to decision maker to strike platform and for a standoff weapon to reach its target. The preemptive strike option that American strategic planning maintained as its ultimate backstop against a massed Iranian missile attack did not exist against the Hwasong-18, and American strategic planning in this theater had not been revised to account for that fact. I want to use a word that official Washington will not use and that the diplomatic language of crisis management systematically avoids. The word is panic, not concern, not alarm, not heightened urgency. Panic. The condition of an institution confronting an outcome for which it has no prepared response, whose decision-making processes are producing paralysis rather than action, and whose public communications are revealing through their careful avoidance of honest description the distance between its rhetorical posture and its operational reality. Washington is panicking this morning, and the panic is rational because the option been set available to an administration that has just lost 3 aircraft carriers and 15,000 personnel does not contain any choices that are simultaneously militarily effective, politically sustainable, and strategically coherent. The retaliatory instinct activated within minutes of the first confirmed sinking reports. It always does. The vocabulary of overwhelming response of unacceptable consequences of holding Iran accountable, that vocabulary does not require deliberation to produce. It is the institutional reflex of a military establishment whose entire strategic culture is built around the premise that American losses are met with American retaliation of sufficient scale to make the adversary regret the action that produced them. The problem confronting that reflex this morning is the same problem that confronted it after every previous Iranian military action against American assets in this theater, compounded by the specific characteristics of the Hwasong-18 threat that make the retaliatory calculus more adverse than any previous version of this calculation. to retaliate militarily against Iran in a manner that is proportionate to the loss of 3 carriers and 15,000 personnel requires striking Iranian territory at a scale and intensity that has no precedent in the post-Cold War era. The targeting requirement alone, meaningful degradation of a 400 Hwasong-18 mobile force dispersed across 6 provinces, exceeds the strike capacity of the naval aviation that would normally execute such a campaign because that naval aviation is currently on the seafloor of the Strait of Hormuz. Executing the campaign from long-range bomber assets operating from Diego Garcia requires sustained overflight of Iranian territory under Iranian air defense coverage. Coverage that has just demonstrated through the operational performance of the systems Iran employed last night, a level of sophistication that American strike planners cannot assume away. And the Hwasong-18 force itself, the target of any meaningful retaliatory campaign, is the specific weapon system whose characteristics most directly defeat the preemptive targeting approach that American doctrine would apply to it. Mobile, solid fuel, dispersed, prepositioned at locations that American satellite coverage has not confirmed to the targeting precision required for strike authorization. A retaliatory campaign against Iranian territory that does not meaningfully degrade the Hwasong-18 force is a campaign that creates Iranian casualties, generates international condemnation, activates Iranian proxy networks across the region, and leaves the primary threat capability intact. The diplomatic dimension is equally dismal for Washington. Emergency communications to Gulf Arab partners, the monarchies whose hosting of American bases provides the physical infrastructure of American regional power rejection, have returned responses of equality that American officials are privately describing as deeply inadequate. Saudi Arabia called for de-escalation. The UAE called for restraint. Bahrain, the Fifth Fleet's home port, suspended its spacing agreement pending reassessment of regional security conditions. The physical infrastructure of American regional power projection is being withdrawn by the governments hosting it in real time in response to last night's demonstration that American military presence is a liability rather than a guarantee. European allies have expressed solidarity in official statements and declined to commit to military participation in any retaliatory operation. NATO's Article 5 collective defense provision does not apply to American military assets operating outside NATO territory, a legal reality that European governments are citing with a precision that suggests they had already prepared the citation before. Last night's events provided the occasion to use it. Washington has this morning the rhetorical posture of a superpower and the operational options of a country that has just had its primary regional military capability removed from the theater by an adversary. It spent 3 months telling itself it could manage that gap between rhetorical posture and operational reality is what panic looks like when it is wearing a suit and speaking carefully into a microphone. I have been asked across the hour since last night's operation variations of the same question by people who have been following this channel and who are genuinely trying to understand what they are seeing. The question takes different forms, but it has a consistent core. How did Iran get here? How does a country under 45 years of comprehensive sanctions, under assassination campaigns against its scientists, under cyber attacks against its infrastructure, under the continuous insistence of its adversaries that its resistance is futile and its capabilities are limited, how does that country end up with 400 Hwasong-18 ICBMs and the operational doctrine to use them in a single night to sink 3 American aircraft carriers? The answer is not primarily technical. The technical answer is available, and I have provided it. The Hwasong-18 transfer, the maneuvering re-entry vehicle, the solid fuel propulsion, the jamming architecture, all of it is real and all of it matters. But the technical capability is the product of something deeper that Western analysis consistently fails to take seriously, because taking it seriously requires a form of honest accounting that Western strategic culture is institutionally resistant to performing. The something deeper is the decision made collectively maintained under conditions of extreme external pressure paid for at enormous costs across 4.5 decades that Iran would not accept a security arrangement in which its survival depended on the goodwill of adversaries who had demonstrated their intention to use that dependence as leverage. That decision produced the investment in indigenous defense capability. That decision produced the willingness to absorb the economic cost of sanctions rather than trade the capability for sanctions relief. That decision produced the institutional patience, the 45-year patience to build toward a strategic position that no amount of external pressure could undo. Western policymakers have spent 45 years treating that decision as irrational, as the product of ideological rigidity rather than strategic calculation, as something that maximum pressure would eventually overcome because maximum pressure always works eventually because no government can indefinitely sustain the cost of resistance against an adversary with the resources of the United States. Last night, 400 Hwasong-18 ICBMs evaluated that theory and found it wrong. I want to be specific about something because I think it is essential to honest analysis, and because the Western commentary produced this morning is already moving toward a framing that I find both analytically inadequate and morally evasive. The sailors and airmen who died last night, the 15,000 American personnel listed as dead, wounded, or missing, did not create the policy that produced last night's outcome. They executed the deployment that policy sent them on. The responsibility for the strategic miscalculation that placed them in a threat environment whose actual danger their government had systematically underestimated belongs to the policymakers, the analysts, the institutional decision makers who maintained a strategic posture built on assumptions that the evidence of 3 months, the evidence of 45 years had already invalidated. Accountability for last night begins there, not with the sailors, with the people who sent them. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. The Fifth Fleet is in the Arabian Sea. 3 American carriers are on the seafloor. Washington is producing statements, and the global order is performing in real time the recalibration that strategic analysts have been modeling as a theoretical future scenario for the past decade. It is no longer theoretical. The immediate economic consequences are visible in the data flowing from energy markets, financial exchanges, and shipping industry communications this morning. Oil prices have moved to levels that energy economists model as the threshold of global recession trigger conditions. The 17 million barrels of oil that normally transit the Strait daily are not moving. The